Hello and welcome to Fast Talk, the ad hoc podcast from Roll for Sanity, where we become mythos investigators in the world of Call of Cthulhu role-playing. Folks, there's just too much Call of Cthulhu for short videos on YouTube and lots of interesting people who we can talk to. So we bring these together here on Fast Talk and see what we can learn to improve our game. Joining us today, we have the very well-read and very well-versed voice behind an excellent story podcast.
Well, hello there, Mr. Outpost, or may I call you Cosmic? Yes, I'm very glad to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on. My name's Mike Percival Maxwell, and I'm the host and reader of tales on the Mr. Spike's Bedtime Stories podcast.
A very wonderful podcast. It is too fun.
Well, thank you.
We'll talk about the bedtime stories in a bit, if that's okay. But the first question I always ask of people on Roll for Sanity is, how did you come to the Call of Cthulhu RPG? Where did it all begin for you?
Well, it all began back in the mists of time, in the before days of the 1980s, when I was a mere strip of a thing, and I had very, very lightly dabbled in the notion of role-playing games, but I was also a reader I was quite a voracious reader when I was younger, and I read some horror stories by a fellow by the name of Lovecraft, and then I discovered that there was a game that had come out, a role-playing game based on this chap's works. So I managed to get hold of. I didn't actually get hold of the full rule book for some reason. I don't know quite why. That is lost in the mists of time. But I managed to get hold of the Cthulhu Companion and also of a campaign known at the time, although it's had a couple of name changes since, as the Fungi from Yuggoth. And I sort of pored over these, and I had kind of ambitions to play them and run them. There's some great scenarios in the Cthulhu Companion, and also some terrible poetry. And in fact, one of the scenarios from it is still alive and kicking in Finefettle to this day. It is called Paper Chase, which has been revamped right up to 7th edition as a sort of solo investigator game. And it's a great introduction to the game. So I'd got these things, and in my sort of early mid-teens, and was very excited about the idea of playing them. And then they sat on a shelf for 10 years, and it wasn't until I was at college, and a friend of mine from my class in college, who had been gaming with friends of his for probably about a decade or so, friends from school, and other people that kind of joined up with their group, and he had been playing with them mostly D&D, but he had ambitions to play Call of Cthulhu, and he kind of knew that I was sort of interested in that sort of thing. And he asked me and a couple of other people as well if we fancied coming along and joining the group and playing. And he had a game he wanted to run called Masks of Nyarlathotep. So yeah, we said that sounds like fun, so we joined. Not all of us stayed, so it wasn't for everyone, but a couple of us are still gaming together with mostly the same group 30 odd years later. And we finished playing Masks. We played a few other scenarios, and I actually got to run the Fungi from Yuggoth, and some of the scenarios from terrible. It was awful. And some of the other scenarios from the companion. So it finally, those books finally got some use. And we sort of had kind of times breaks from gaming and got back together again, and then people moved abroad, so gaming became a bit more difficult. But yeah, I'm still playing with those guys decades later. So yeah, that is kind of that's how I came across and started playing Call of Cthulhu.
Question of keep your friends close, but your role-playing buddies even closer. To actually have that
absolutely.
is amazing.
I mean, we started playing online really early because our main GM had moved abroad. There was a long period of time where we kind of didn't really game that much, and then we managed to find a way to kind of get together online. And this was very in kind of the early days, we were using Skype and that sort of thing in order to be able to chat, and using an application called Map Tool. I don't know if anyone has heard of or has ever used that. A sort of a precursor of things like Roll20 and that kind of thing, really. but very buggy. We usually spent half the session trying to get the damn thing working. But it kind of kept us gaming.
It is something when you can game for that long. I guess you never ran out of things to play because Call of Cthulhu is so vast.
Well, we didn't really play much Call of Cthulhu, to be honest. We mostly played D&D. We initially AD&D in second edition, and then on to third edition, and then we moved on to playing Pathfinder. And a lot of what we played were kind of homebrew campaigns that went on for years and years, many years. We had one campaign that went on for nearly a decade of real time. So, obviously that's including some breaks and stuff like that. But even so, and then it was kind of not that long ago, I suppose. We came to the end of a campaign, and then one of the other guys in the group said, "Listen, we haven't played anything other than this for quite a long time. Should we play some Call of Cthulhu? What do you fancy?" So we started doing that a bit more, and
let me dust off my books.
Well, pretty much, pretty much. And then, of course, lockdown happened, and we were like, "Well, that doesn't make any difference to us, really." But because we've been playing online for such a long time,
pioneers.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that, but yeah, I suppose we kind of already got our heads around the idea of playing with using technology rather than sitting face to face, because we hadn't sat down face to face for donkeys. But the thing that lockdown did for me in gaming terms was I'd been listening to a couple of actual play podcasts and other sort of associated podcasts. One of which was, you may know, the Good Friends of Jackson on Ice podcast. And they, in the middle of lockdown, around, I think it was June or July 2020, they decided to host an online convention.
Right.
And I'd never played with anyone else. I'd only ever played with the guys in my group. And, I kind of thought, well, maybe give this a go, see what it's like, see what the vibe is with different people from all over the world. And it was fantastic. I had an absolutely brilliant time, and I've never really looked back since. Got to play with lots of amazing keepers, amazing players from one side of the globe to the other.
And it is a real difference. I tend to find, when you were mentioning how long you were playing D&D for, I was remembering the days where I used to play, Queen of the Demon Web Pits, and, having Cavaliers, which had portable holes and could blink out of existence and things like that. Was it a big shift for your group to play Call of Cthulhu? Because I know I see so many people in forums saying, "Yeah, we're playing D&D. I'm trying to get my group to do some Call of Cthulhu." I guess you had the adventurous kind that said, "Yeah, let's give it a go."
Well, yeah, I mean, we had previously played Call of Cthulhu, although it was many years ago. So we knew what it was all about, and the whole group, everyone in the group, is very heavily into the role play aspect. This is one of the reasons that our campaigns took such a long time, because we really enjoyed the character interaction, and some wonderful kind of experiences that we had, and wonderful sort of moments of role play with character conflict or what have you. So we knew what to expect, with Call of Cthulhu. We knew it wasn't going to be crunchy, moving across a board, which is something that I've never been particularly good at, and b particularly enjoyed that sort of tactical aspect of it, and all the number crunching and everything. As any of them will say, if asking me to work out, what I needed to roll to hit or how many dice
tell me about it
for my damage, it's just completely useless. So we didn't really have a huge leap to make in order to sort of make that shift into Call of Cthulhu again.
And do you still mainly play Call of Cthulhu, or do you branch out into some of the newer games?
I mean, as a group, we are currently playing DCC, but in general, I found so many more games. I was I was pretty restricted in my knowledge of what was out there, really up until I kind of started interacting with the wider kind of global gaming community, and I hadn't realized just exactly how much more there was, how many systems there were, how much had developed, and how many different kind of gaming concepts. There were different ways of playing, and it really was a big eye opener for me. Very exciting as well, you know.
Yeah, certainly when I came back to Call of Cthulhu, folks have heard me talk about being a COVID refugee. All my creative projects shut down overnight. I found Call of Cthulhu was still going, and folks like Seth Skorokowski were telling us that it's still out there. And I was very pleased to find Pulp Cthulhu was a thing.
Yes.
And just picking up the books and going with it, but certainly there is just no end of Call of Cthulhu. And so I think the next question we get to ask is, what has recently caught your eye in the world of Call of Cthulhu? It doesn't have to be of role-playing games, could be in books or Kickstarters, anything you've spotted at all?
Well, specifically Call of Cthulhu related, I suppose it has to be the Cthulhu by Gaslight. Player's Handbook has come out, which I was expecting and hoping to get for Christmas, but didn't. So I suppose I'm going to have to fork out some cash for that myself. And of course, I think the Keeper's Handbook is due out very soon, because I do like my Gaslight setting. It is, I think, for me, probably my favorite kind of time period for Call of Cthulhu. I'm not entirely sure why, but it's for me that kind of. I mean, I suppose, Dickensian is a slightly different period, but that whole kind of period of history, right from the sort of mid 1800s, right up until, maybe around the First World War or so, I find it endlessly fascinating, and I find it's a really evocative period for horror, because some of the great horror stories were being written and published around that sort of time, and I suppose that, there are many people who would say it was, that it was the Gothic era, a reimagined Victorian Gothic era. It was really kind of steeped in blood and scares. So I think, from a Call of Cthulhu perspective, definitely the Cthulhu Gaslight books that's pretty exciting for me.
Have you had previous editions sitting on your shelves?
No, I don't. I have a pretty limited bookshelf, actually, although it's slowly but surely growing, and occasionally some of it gets read. But I think I have that in common with a lot of people, in that I like to have things on my bookshelf, and I don't always necessarily actually take them down off my bookshelf and go through them.
It's more about the collecting.
It is, yeah. I mean, I've got the Down Darker Trails, which I've had sitting there for a while, which in a sense is Gaslight in a different location, and also there's the kind of the Cthulhu adjacent. I managed to get hold of the Laundry Files RPG not very long ago, which I believe there's a new edition coming out of.
I heard that too, yeah.
But I've read some of the Laundry Files books and really enjoyed them, and really liked the sort of take on them, and played a couple of Laundry File games at conventions. And I mean, it's a kind of just a different slant. And I played a bit of Delta Green and stuff as well.
I was just going to ask, how does Laundry Files compare to Delta Green?
It's like. I suppose it's a bit like Delta Green with pratfalls. It's not nearly as kind of dark as Delta Green is. Not nearly as kind of dark and disturbing as Delta Green is. And it's got a very British feel to it as well. It's a really, really. It's of its place, and it's a kind of I suppose sarcastic humor, and that the satirical humor that Britain is. World famous for.
I think there was something in the 80s where that British humour really made it into the role-playing games. Were you ever one for the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay?
Never played it. Never been near it.
All kinds of just alliterations and play on words and that sort of thing in the game itself. And the humour was just great. And you hear it in the campaigns that have made it through into actual plays, like the Enemy Within campaign. But yes, that quintessential British 80s humour.
Easy for you to say.
Speaking of the 80s, did you see that Chaosium Japan book? Let me look it up. The
The-
Sutra of Pale Leaves.
yes,
Encountering the Yellow King in 1980s Japan. Gosh, I wonder who's behind that then.
yes.
I was intrigued to see this one simply because I always remember Mike Mason on a podcast saying, okay, advice for writers, don't write the Yellow King. It's been done to death. So if Chaosium are putting it in a book, it must be really good.
I would like to think so.
Yeah.
I know that Call of Cthulhu is absolutely huge in Japan.
Right.
It's bigger than D&D. It's the biggest by far and away, the most popular role playing game in Japan. And to the best of my understanding, it's I think their scenarios have a kind of a slightly different feel to them. But I am quite excited to see what they do with, because I do like King in Yellow. There, I find the King in Yellow, quite an interesting kind of concept, and there's some really amazing King in Yellow based scenarios out there as well, and they are all really weird. But yeah. I mean, I get the feeling that this is the first of a few, because this one's got the subtitle Twin Suns Rising, so. It leads me to think, well, if this is the Sutra of Pale Leaves, Twin Suns Rising, what's the next Sutra of Pale Leaves?
Okay, so do I have to brush up my Gran Turismo and try and learn all those Japanese supercar names so I have a cool ride when I'm in a chase scene?
Who knows? Maybe.
The 1980s Japan, I mean, that just sounds like neon, retro, synth wave, all that kind of thing. I would really hope that the folks at Sirenscape get on board with and give us some synthwave tunes to go behind all of that. You mentioned the principle of the king in Yellow. Could you elaborate on that? Because I never really get past anything more than the repairer of reputation.
Right.
Is that the one? Because that always strikes me as a bit, well, okay. So how could you, in a small soundbite, you mentioned that principle of the King in Yellow. How do you mean?
So I think what I mean is this sense that there is a place which is somehow adjacent to our world that we live in, but where everything is sort of twisted and different, and it sometimes kind of crashes, seeps into our world, and I think it's about corruption as well. It's the sense that there is this kind of this figure which promises some kind of revelation or knowledge and understanding or insight into whatever it is that lies just beyond your vision. That you maybe just catch something that doesn't look quite right in your periphery, and when you turn to look, it's gone. But then there's also a kind of a sense of the world twisting and becoming unrecognizable, once familiar places not being as you recall them, and it's to do with the incursion of this land or city. It's never really entirely clearly spelled out whether it's the city or the whole country. This place Carcosa, which exists, far out into the galaxy, and yet somehow also exists here on Earth. And there's ways to kind of move from one place to the other. And then, of course, there is this figure, this King in Yellow, which is the King in Yellow Hastur? Is Hastur the King in Yellow? Is one a kind of avatar of the other? Again, there's this kind of ambiguity, and some people have sort of tried to nail it down and define and pigeonhole. But I think the thing that I like most about the King in Yellow, and the way Chambers writes it, is that you can't pigeonhole it, because it's it's almost indefinable. That there is an ambiguity to it. There is an otherworldliness to it that just doesn't really make sense, and it defies definition. And for me, that's what makes it really kind of interesting. Does that sound bite? I don't know. It's quite a long.
No, I mean that's fantastic because unfortunately I've always been a little bit dismissive of the King in Yellow because I have this picture of Hasta as a great big blob man lying on its side, practically melting.
All right.
And so when
Jabba
they
the
talk
Hutt,
about
you're thinking of.
so when it's the King in Yellow, this mysterious, and I compare it to almost something that looked like an evil version of Sackboy as an illustration. It kind of never really matched up for me. So I'll be interested to see what the encountering the King in Yellow in 1980s Japan will be like.
Yeah, I mean, I strongly suspect it's going to be seeing figures on street corners who are there one minute and who aren't there the next, and alleyways that weren't there before, and this kind of thing, and getting seduced into this kind of otherworldly experience, which is by and large not going to be a particularly pleasant one.
Be a particular one, yes. What lies behind that white face, or is it a mask?
The pallid mask, indeed.
Pallid mask. The other thing I spotted recently was I mentioned the Alchemy virtual tabletop game system, virtual tabletop game.
Mm-hmm.
They'd just released some Call of Cthulhu, and it was on its way. But no sooner had I released that episode of the podcast, but it arrived. And it's fun. It's going to take some getting used to. Many thanks to Graham from the RPG Nook, who helped me navigate it a little bit, because initially you don't think that's much there, but you have to dive a little deeper.
Right.
For Theatre of the Mind, I think it's going to be fantastic.
Okay.
Because essentially they've got these fantastic pre-generated backgrounds for your game. So if you're just playing Theatre of the Mind, you can throw out one picture, and they have overlays that don't tax your computer too much. So I put in a picture of Arctic explorers by a black monolith, and then just added some snow effects. And Graham and I were looking at it going, wow, that looks pretty cool.
Nice.
And I'm thinking, in my technical side, well, it's just a picture with some overlay. And Graham's like, well, don't spoil it. Yeah, no, okay, that is rather cool, actually. So I'll try and put a game together on it, because I think, for something that you just want a nice, simple, I mean, for me, out of a VTT, I don't know about you, I just want a character sheet, a dice roller, and maybe a place to share some handouts. Was that similar to
Yeah,
Matt?
100%. That's, I mean, I frequently, if I'm playing just like a one-shot, 1 or 2 session games, I very, very rarely even bother with a VTT. I'll just try and do everything in Theatre of the Mind. Maybe throw up a handout through whatever means, whether it's through a Discord server or through a Google Doc or whatever. If there's handouts to be had. But generally speaking, I don't sort of faff about. Where I think they come into their own is if you're doing a longer campaign. So I'm running a campaign just at the moment where there's pictures of NPCs and that, but also it's a place to store handouts where you can go back and refer to them as you get through the campaign. Because if you're playing a game that's going to last a year or so, or maybe even more, you're not going to remember what the handout that you got given 6 months ago said, or you might not even remember where you found it or where to find it when you want to read it again. So I think something like a VTT is handy for that. Also for tracking your character development and that kind of thing. I think it's really useful for that. But I generally, as I say, for like one or two shots, I just don't bother with it. I have used it, and it can be nice, but for me, it's just one more thing to worry about when I'm trying to concentrate on running a game, and my brain is taxed enough with trying to remember NPC names and stuff like that without having to mess about with technology.
So next on Fast Talk, we break up the show with a little bit of music that won't get me a copyright strike. We take another trip to White Bat retro horror synth theme, Sanity Unravels, music by Karl Casey at White Bat Audio. Very retro indeed. That was Sanity Unravels from White Bat Audio. Speaking of sanity unraveling, I always feel a little nervous when I take a seat by the fire and listen to Mr. Spike's bedtime stories. What was your drive to read horror stories to people?
Well, I mean, apart from the obvious, wanting to give them nightmares,
That wasn't how Jack and Nora used to be.
I'd like to bring a little something into people's lives. No, so I spoke earlier on about the good friends of Jackson and Elias, and when I joined their Discord server back in sort of early 2020, I think it was, or thereabouts, there were a few people who occasionally read stories, just dropped into a voice channel and read a short story, almost invariably horror themed, because that's the theme of the podcast, and that's the main kind of common frame of reference and of those who are members of the server. I thought, I could maybe give a go at that, maybe read a little story or something. That'd be nice. I have a trained voice. So yeah, I kind of took my cue from those that were doing that, and jumped in and read a couple of stories. People seemed to enjoy it. And then a couple of people said, why didn't you do your own podcast? And I kind of resisted it for quite a long time, because I thought,
a lot of work.
I just don't know if I can be bothered, because I am essentially a very lazy person.
Efficient person.
Yes, if I can avoid doing something,
exactly.
I'll go to a great deal of effort to avoid doing things. So, but anyway, eventually I kind of thought, well, maybe I could do this. And so I kind of hunted around a bit and found some stories that I thought might be quite good. And I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. It's, you don't know until you try, So I didn't really have anything to lose other than a bit of my time and potentially self-esteem. But I got myself this microphone that I'm using just now, and I kind of started reading and recording some stories. Found a platform to put them out on, which wasn't going to cost me an arm and a leg. And then I thought it was kind of early in 2021 that I started Mr. Spike's Bedtime Stories, and I'd already kind of put together a few stories that I'd previously read, so I kind of had a few to start off with. And the first one that I put out was Casting the Runes by M.R. James, which is, I think, still one of the most popular stories on the podcast, and is one of my favourite stories. And I just kind of kicked it off from there. And, it started very, very, very small, but I was extremely lucky in that in one of the episodes of the Good Friends podcast, in one of their own podcast episodes, they kind of mentioned my story and kind of linked to me and that sort of thing. And, I managed to get a few more listeners through that. And the numbers have sort of grown since then. So I've been doing it, now, for nearly 4 years, I suppose. And I don't have a big audience or anything like that, but, I don't do masses of publicity, and, I just kind of throw out some links on various Discord servers that I'm a member of, and up until recently on Twitter, but I've got the hell out of that shit show. And Blue Sky, and I'm still in Facebook because I have family that use Facebook. So yeah, that I mean, it was going back to your actual question. It was really seeing how people enjoyed other people reading stories that I thought, well, I think I would enjoy doing that as well. And then, as I say, a few people kind of prodded me and poked me and encouraged me to start doing it as a podcast.
Well, it's certainly a help to dyslexic folk like me. I used to despair at the volunteer LibriVox readings, wanting to add some drama to their voices. I think they do accents these days. Did you ever hear those? Did you have any influences, so to speak?
I've heard a couple of the LibriVox recordings, and I mean I don't want to knock them because it's great what they're doing.
They do a good job.
It's absolutely they're doing it out of enthusiasm and the desire to provide a much needed service, I suppose, for people. But I do appreciate that it's not a profession for them. It's not something that I think anyone should in any way discourage. But yes, I mean, influences. I kind of think I think my biggest influence. I mean, I've heard there's a couple of other similar podcasts on places like YouTube and podcast kind of audio podcasts that do pretty much the same sort of thing that I'm doing. Some of them have been going quite a lot longer, and some of them have got a much, much greater output than I have, an incredible output. Sometimes I wonder how they find the time. But I think from me, the thing that sort of influenced me, inspired me, I think, is the ghost stories that used to get read around Christmas time on the BBC back in the day, and which have now more recently been kind of revived by Mark Gatiss and the like. And those were the things they really, they really kind of sent shivers up my spine when I was a kid. And, I really enjoyed them, and I really enjoyed that kind of rich storytelling, descriptive dialogue, and the suspense building up to the kind of the revelation or scare at the end of the story. And I think that's really what kind of inspired me to emulate that kind of feel, that kind of sitting around a fire with the cold and the snow outside, and listening to the sounds of the house creaking around you. Maybe the electricity's gone out and you're sitting by candlelight, and somebody says, "Would you like to hear a ghost story?" And that that's just that excitement and that anticipation of that's really my inspiration. And if I can in some small way bring that kind of feeling to people, then I think I've done my job.
And your choice of stories, are you reading all of the time, or please tell me you're actually strolling through your vast library at the start of your show?
Oh no, absolutely. Yes, it's the almost endless corridors. Some of them I don't even know where they go. I
Very well.
get lost in there for days sometimes, wandering around, wondering how to find my way out. It's a labyrinth. No, in all seriousness, I'm a terrible reader. I genuinely am. The way I find the stories that because I read nothing but, well, almost nothing. I say nothing, but that's not strictly true. Public domain audiobooks, and boy, that's a can of worms in itself to determine what is and what is not public domain. Generally speaking, the stories that I find and I read are through old collections, or places like Project Gutenberg, or there's a lot of websites out there which have got kind of collections of Victorian Edwardian tales, and that's really kind of what I specialize in. Is specialize, maybe if that's the right word. But my actual physical library at home is pitifully small. It really is. I mean, I did read voraciously when I was young, but as I've got older, I tend to read less and less, and I've got the same problem that I think possibly a lot of people have, is the time I get to read is really when I go to bed. And when I go to bed, I'm tired. So I'm about 3 paragraphs in, and I'm being told, Mike, you've fallen asleep again. So I'm a terribly slow reader. So really, the way that I find the stories that I read is I kind of plunder the internet archives of stories. And, I do have a few kind of compilations, collections of short stories, and finding ones that are about the right sort of length. And, I've got a few go-to authors as well, but it's really nice to find new ones. The story that I'm working on just now is a new one, a new author to me, and that's another thing that I hope that I'm able to do in the podcast, is maybe bring listeners to authors that they maybe weren't aware of, and that can kind of lead them down the rabbit hole and find stories that they like, and maybe other authors as well that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, I mean, I remember listening to modern mythos writer Karis MacDonald and their story Diva Nodente.
Yes.
Karis, of course, folks, is one of the main writers on the Cthulhu by Gaslight book. Do you think there's a market for these new fiction writers and, of course, the Chaosium novels?
I mean, I hope so. Diva Nodente is a great story, and I was very lucky that Karis gave me permission to read the story for the podcast. And I would like to be able to read some more modern stories. But I think partly it's difficult, though, partly because there are already contractual agreements in place with certain authors and certain platforms. There is one very well known audiobook platform which I think has got the kind of the bulk of the market share in terms of that. There's some amazing stuff on it. Some really, really great stuff on it. I mean, I listen to, it's not particularly modern. I've taken to listening to audiobooks, which I never really used to do, but there are some extremely well read audiobooks out there. I recently read the Blackwater saga, or when I say read, listened to someone reading the Blackwater saga, which would have taken me probably the rest of my life to read if I'd actually got the books and sat down and read them and myself. But I was able to sort of put it on when I was driving, or when I was kind of put my feet up or whatever, and just kind of listened, and they're absolutely fantastic. Now these aren't, they're modern 80s modern, but they are set back in the kind of the early part of the 20th century. And they're fantastic. Michael McDowell, I absolutely recommend them. And of course, there's other. Stephen King has done a few mythos tales himself, obviously. And then there's fantastic authors like Ramsey Campbell and the like, who's been producing some extraordinary work for many years now.
I remember first chatting with you about coming on the show. I was fascinated by the close-knit world of the Cthulhu mythos writers. You mentioned, Ramsey Campbell. But the original ones, they had ties to Conan the Barbarian, the Psycho film, I think it is. Mm-hmm. Do you have an original mythos writers you prefer over others, and what makes you pick their stories?
You see, this is where we come into a kind of a bit of a quagmire, because it all depends on how you define mythos.
Yes.
Because, obviously mythos in and of itself is just mythology, really. It's just, I think I looked up the dictionary definition of mythos. I think it's the Collins Dictionary, says the complex of beliefs, values, attitudes, etc., characteristic of a specific group or society, or another word for myth or mythology.
Yeah.
And of course, Lovecraft himself famously never really used the term Cthulhu mythos. If that's what we're
coined
talking about.
after his death, wasn't it?
It was really August Derleth, who was seeking to kind of write tales of his own and collect things into a sort of a pigeonhole, I suppose. I think the term that Lovecraft himself used was yog-sothothery, which is rather good. But yes, I think Derleth is really responsible for saying these are Cthulhu mythos tales. And the other writers who were either influenced by Lovecraft or writing at the same time, and were maybe corresponding with him, they were writing tales which kind of sort of fit into that imaginary universe that were then kind of labelled, this kind of rubber stamp of Cthulhu mythos tale. And as you say, people like Robert E. Howard and Robert Bloch, who wrote a lot. Very influenced by H.P. Lovecraft and wrote a lot, especially in his early years of writing, wrote a lot of horror tales and tales that were had the same kind of feel to them, maybe referenced the same, I'm sort of hesitant to call them deities, but otherworldly beings of immense power and unknowableness.
They were a very close-knit community. I remember reading that they used to include each other in the stories as characters and kill them off or something like that. Yeah. It really is a really interesting subject to look into, folks. Now, to bring this section to a close, a bit of an old question. Is there a story you'd like to read, but it hasn't been written just yet? So a low-level example from me was I'd like a story about the Hounds of Tindalos. How about you?
I mean, yes, there absolutely is a story that hasn't been written yet that I'd love to read. I just don't know what it is. But when somebody writes it, then I'd be more than happy to read it. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about specific themes or creatures that entities that are referenced in the works of Lovecraft and other people who wrote in that same genre. I mean, I don't know. For me, it's because very, very few of the stories that I read on my podcast are actually what you might call Cthulhu mythos stories. They cover kind of a wide range of weird tales. That's kind of how I sort of like to think of them, because the theme of them is there's always something inexplicable about them. Whether that's something ghostly, whether that's something monstrous, whether that's something entirely kind of human in origin is another matter. But there's always something that's kind of reality is askew in some way, and that I think is what makes for an unsettling tale. And that's what I kind of aim to do. I aim to sort of unsettle people a little, maybe make them go, oh, don't know about that, don't know if I like that, and maybe they do kind of check under the bed before they go to bed, or just make sure that the doors are locked. And there's folk horror as well. I read a novella not that long ago by a friend of mine called Elizabeth Davison called it's called Residents of Honeysuckle Cottage, which is a folk horror book, and it's it's about two people who move into this community, and something's not quite right, and it's about them kind of discovering what is not right about this community and how it affects them and how they deal with it. So for me, I think the story that hasn't been written yet that I'd like to read doesn't necessarily contain anything in particular, but something that contains something that is really unsettling and inexplicable and puzzling, something with a mystery to it, I suppose, a mystery that may or may not get solved, but in the process of attempting to solve it, the characters in the story discover things that they, maybe wish they hadn't.
When you are not at Spike Towers, you get to be on actual plays of games
I do,
and
yes. Very lucky.
Audio performances of other materials. How did that come about? How did you get into that?
That's a good question. I don't really know. Someone
You fell into
someone
it.
asked me if I'd like to be in a game, and I said yes, please. And I think the first thing I did was we did the Old Ways put on Horror on the Orient Express, and
Stay for the entire trip?
I did, yes.
Wow.
Yes, I made it through right in the end. Same. Well, I'm not going to say whether the same character made it through right to the end or not, but I did.
Spoilers.
No, I mean, and fantastic cast as well. Really, really, really fantastic cast with some people that I absolutely adore role playing with, and who over the years have become very good friends as well. So that's sort of possibly sparked off other people saying, "Would you like to be in this game as well?" So I mean, I've been very, very lucky. And people do, seem to think that I won't ruin a game that they put out for public consumption.
What characters do you like to play the absolute most?
Idiots.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, my go-to character is an eccentric buffoon, a verbose, loquacious, eccentric buffoon, which, gives me an excuse to be incompetent. I can always say, well, the character's incompetent. It's not me, the player, that's incompetent. I'm playing an incompetent character. That's why.
This is it. And this is why I like doing the Fast Talk show, folks, because I get to meet folks like Mike and say that I really, really enjoyed your security guard in the Crimson Letters from the Apocalypse
so much fun.
It is one of the quintessential run-throughs of the Crimson Letters that is so spooky, weird, comical, and there's a certain tragedy in your security guard's character, which, you just hear
Tragically
over
inept.
this. Tragically inept.
Well, I mean, that came about because Dominic Allen, who's the keeper for that. I mean, the Apocalypse players are a really, really great gang. And Dominic is a fantastic keeper as well. In fact, they all are, actually. But we had been chatting about different well-known scenarios. And I happened to mention that I'd never played Crimson Letters. And I think, I guess he'd been already sort of thinking about putting it together. And then he said, well, do you want to play it then? So I did. I played the hell out of it.
Yeah,
and the other guys, and in fact, one of the other players in that, Doug McAndrew, he's one of my home group. From
wow.
I've known him for several decades now. I'll not say exactly how many because that'll yes, we're neither of us exactly in the bloom of youth anymore. So that was a fantastic time. That's one of the most enjoyable games I've had. I do like to play buffoons, but it really does depend on the vibe of the game. I'm a kind of a curious sort of person. I like to try and puzzle things out. I like to try and figure things out. So I also quite like to play characters that are curious and and like trying to get to the heart of a mystery and work out what the hell is going on in this this situation.
And some of the performances that you do aren't necessarily actual plays. What did you do at Christmas time?
I think it must have been in 2020, Christmas 2020. I'd been reading a couple of stories, and some other people had been reading stories, and the notion of maybe doing the podcast had been kind of floating around inside my head. And I think we'd gone into a conversation about these Christmas stories that I was talking about, the BBC Christmas stories, and what a wonderful tradition it was, and that sort of thing. And then I'd gone away, and it had sort of stewed in my head for a little bit, and I was thinking, a Christmas story. Oh, do you know what would be fun? Well, you know what would be fun if we could do a Christmas story, like a story reading, but I can maybe get the good friends to play the characters in it, the ghosts or something like that in it. I thought, that would be great. Oh no, they would never want to do that. Never in a million years want to do that. And then I was chatting with Rena Henze, who was also one of the players in Horror on the Orient Express. And they were saying, you should just go for it. You should just ask. I said, I could ask Scott Dorward if he would like to maybe, I don't know, play Scrooge. And they said, just ask him, for Christ, just ask him. What's the worst that could happen? He'll say no, get lost. But he was up for it, and Paul Fricker as well was up for it. So we put together. It was myself and Dominic Allen as well, and Rena and Paul and Scott, and I'm trying to think if there was anyone else, and I'm going to be incredibly embarrassed if I've missed someone else off. But I think it was just us. It was a very long time ago, and I'm a very old man, and I don't remember anything.
The originals.
So if I've forgotten somebody because we've had changes of cast over the years, but I think that was the original gang. And yeah, we read an abridged version of A Christmas Carol, and it was a lot of fun, and people really seemed to enjoy it. So we did something similar the following year, and we got a couple more people in. And then we did something similar the following year, and we were a couple more people in. And last Christmas 2024, we managed to gather together a pretty ludicrous number of people. I really made a rod for my own back with this. Yeah, and we read 2 of the Thomas Carnacki, the Ghost Finder stories by William Hope Hodgson. And yeah, we had a lot of fun doing it. And, it has sort of become a regular thing, and we really enjoy reading them, and I hope people enjoy listening to them as well.
Now, any war stories from your game that you think, yes, that sums up what it's all about?
This is a really hard question for somebody who has a terrible memory. I mean, there were a few moments in Crimson Letters which I remember with great affection, and there were several moments during the course of Horror on the Orient Express, which were so much fun to play. Not necessarily kind of big action scenes or ridiculous things happening, although having my hand smashed with a hammer by one of the fellow investigators accidentally, who was trying to smash open I think it was a doorway in kind of a rusted closed doorway. He started hitting it with a hammer, and I think he rolled he fumbled his roll or something. And then, anyway, I ended up getting hit in the hand with a hammer very hard, and that kind of carried on throughout the rest of the campaign in the bitterness from that. But yeah, I mean, we've had other moments in that which have been, really kind of close interpersonal kind of role-playing moments, which have been just, really, really special. There was, one particular scene between my character and Rena's character, who had this kind of long-standing relationship anyway, but it was a very professional relationship, where things had been escalating, and, they reached a point where there was a friendship developing, a kind of a camaraderie developing between them. And all the horrors that they were experiencing was sort of bringing them closer together as people, two very different people, but with some similarities that they were able to find in each other. And that those are the moments that I really enjoy. That the role play, for me, it's all about the role play. It's all about the character development and character interaction, whether it be a violent, aggressive interaction, or whether it be, kind of moving moments of tenderness and closeness. That's it's a role-playing game. I love to play roles. Yeah. So I was playing in one of the scenarios from the sort of mini campaign that is called Flotsam and Jetsam.
Oh wow! Yes.
So this is one of the sort of the third scenario in the. It's not strictly speaking a campaign, because it's kind of more scenarios that have kind of loose links to each other.
Takes place in a 20s America.
Yes.
Down south, isn't it?
Well, it takes place in sort of different places, mostly kind of around New England. And it's a group of it's 4 scenarios basically, which have a kind of a common thread between them. Anyway, this was the third scenario, which is, as we record, is currently being broadcast by How We Roll. It's called Insanitarium. by Anthony Lee Dudley. And so anyway, the war story is me and another investigator, both kind of elder gentlemen, who spent the entire time bickering probably about what they were going to have for their lunch, about completing trivial, inconsequential matters, whilst the third member of the investigative team, a go-getting young woman, went off and went to another location, gathered a load of information, had some interaction with NPCs, and came back to discover us still standing on the same steps before a library that we'd been standing on where they left us, bickering about the same nonsense, having done absolutely nothing in the intervening time. That was a very enjoyable moment in the game for me.
And do you have any words of advice? You've been through the entire Orient Express, your Crimson Letters alone. What could you say to help us improve our game when we sit down at a table?
Words of advice. I mean, I don't know if I'm really in any position to give anyone any advice on anything, but...
don't put your hand in front of a door.
Don't put your hand in front of a door, yes. Very much so. Always look left and right and several times either direction before crossing the road. I think for a game that's of a nature of Call of Cthulhu, an investigative horror game, and you know that there are different scenarios that have slightly different balance of horror and investigation, but I would say don't be afraid to do the wrong thing. Don't be afraid to take action of some kind in case it has negative consequences, or you think it might be the wrong thing to do. Just take some action. I think action is always better than inaction. Don't worry about whether you've got the skills that your character has, because a good keeper will bear that in mind and, you know, will be able to allow you to play the character you're playing instead of, you know, feeling like you're restricted to your own knowledge and your own abilities. And I think for a game of investigative horror, go and poke the thing. Go and, you know, if there's something behind a door, try and get the door open and see what's there. Investigate. Be curious. Yeah, you know, go places you're not supposed to go. Look at things you're not supposed to look at. But yeah, I mean, I think definitely I would say just try doing stuff. You know, just do stuff, and don't worry about whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing to do, because it's all about the story. It's not about getting it right.
That is the thing. When you have a character, you may not end up playing that character again. So what does it matter if they get their face melted off because they open the door?
Having your face melted off can be just as much fun as not having your face melted off.
That just about wraps up our literary excursion to Mr. Spike's bedtime stories. Huge thanks to Mike, aka Mr. Spike. Where can folks find you?
You can find me on the podcast platform of your choice, where all you have to do is search for Mr. Spike's bedtime stories. It's in Apple Podcasts and Spotify and various other places. If you've got a podcast app and you search for it, it should find it okay. And you can hear me on some actual plays, Symphony Entertainment, Grizzly Peaks Radio, the Apocalypse Players that we've mentioned before, How We Roll. I've been very lucky I've been asked to do a couple of games with them. Ain't Slayed Nobody, same, and of course The Old Ways for the Horror on the Orient Express campaign and a few other sort of one-shot scenarios as well.
Folks, you have a list there of all the go-tos for Call of Cthulhu podcast. Mike, you rub shoulders with some fantastic...
Oh, and the Illusion horror as well. That's one. Yes, one I did recently.
Illusion horror. And yes, it's out at the moment. And of course, the Miskatonic Playhouse, where you find...
Of course, yes. And the Miskatonic Playhouse.
Great fun
I smacked my wrist for not mentioning the Miskatonic Playhouse.
I'm sure Newman will forgive you. There should be show notes to all the things we've just mentioned in the blog. So visit www.rollforsanity.com. Thank you very much, Mike. Thanks for joining us, and we'll roll for sanity again soon.